I want to thank our sponsors, Athletic Greens, who created AG1, one of the most innovative packets of supplements, including 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. These ingredients support your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. I personally started using Athletic Greens and love the way I feel in the morning after I drink it. And I no longer have energy crashes throughout the day. And the best part is that it's delicious. The founder of Athletic Greens created AG1 because he experienced a ton of gut health and ended up on a complicated and expensive supplement routine to recover. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/Yasmin. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/Yasmin, YASMEEN, to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Peggy Fitzsimmons, who holds a Ph.D. in counseling psychology and has worked in the fields of counseling and healing for over 25 years. She also lived and worked at the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies in New York and was a consulting producer on Oprah Winfrey's Emmy-winning TV series Super Soul Sunday. Peggy has utilized her expertise to help many people get their houses in order through intensive decluttering. And in her book, Release, Create a Clutter-Free and Soul-Driven Life, she shares some of her tips and practical insights with readers who want to free themselves from clutter. And I had the pleasure of reading her book and found it incredibly useful. So I'm so excited to welcome Peggy to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Yasmin. Great to be here.
So Peggy, to kick it off, what types of clutter do we often carry in our life?
Well, that's a good question. I think the most obvious one is physical clutter, and that's where people put their focus, right? I've got too much stuff, and that's true. But I also think we're burdened with mental clutter, emotional clutter, energetic clutter, and relationship clutter, as well as physical clutter. And in my book, I've tried to show how those are all connected. And I did that by kind of taking a spiritual perspective on the whole thing.
And why did you decide to focus on clutter specifically?
Well, I had been working with people in their homes, and when you do that kind of work, it's very intimate and very sacred, right? Because you're with someone in their environment, and you see everything, things that are holding them back and things that are keeping them moving forward and feeling happy and free in life. So decluttering's kind of always been part of my way. You know, I'm a Virgo. I like beauty. I decided, I can do this and help people at the same time. And through all of that work, I really kind of began to see the patterns of clutter and how all forms of clutter are connected and how they kind of relate to the two aspects within each of us, which is kind of our soul aspect and our ego aspect. And so that framework or lens is how I've approached the book and how I approach my work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the stories that you shared. And I think it would be so powerful for our audience to also get a sense of what does that look like? You know, a lot of times I think people assume that their homes are sort of clean enough or tidy enough or organized enough. And I think we sort of can't get out of our own way and don't even notice what's holding us back. So what are some examples that you've seen of maybe former clients that you've worked with that have kind of kept excess stuff in their homes?
Mm-hmm.
So we could start with the physical clutter and walk through some of the other types of clutter.
Okay, well, I think it's important just kind of to get where I'm coming from is to kind of give a little bit of an overview of how I'm thinking about it, and then move into that aspect because
Yep.
it's all related. So to me, we have two aspects of ourselves, right? We have our soul aspect, we have our ego aspect. And the soul is the part of us that's, eternal and wise and loving, right? Our soul knows peace and joy and gratitude. The soul aspect of us is free and unattached, but yet deeply connected to everyone and everything. Um, and 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 most of us do not have that aspect of ourselves at the wheel of our lives.
Mm.
Instead, we have the ego aspect of ourselves. The ego is kind of the image we construct of ourselves, right? The beliefs, the needs, the roles, the possessions, everything we identify with in the world. And our ego aspect is concerned with self preservation and success and survival. The ego aspect of us knows fear and competition and conflict and scarcity. And it sees us as separate from other people and even from the earth itself. So we have these two aspects. One is more true than the other, but typically the false self of the ego is at the wheel and driving our lives. Um, and I'm connecting all this to your original question about clutter, in that the ego mindset is one that says, I am not enough, you are not enough, and there is not enough. So when you're coming from that mindset, you begin to accumulate
Hmm.
and you have certain thoughts, right? Your thoughts are about lack and separation, and your emotions are more fearful or shameful or guilty, right? All these negative emotions, and um, your relationships have a lot of judging and disharmony in them, and you begin to accumulate and hold on because you feel like you're not enough and there is not enough. And that's when people come to me and they say, I can't take it in my house. I'm overwhelmed. I have too many things. I'm not doing what I feel I want to be doing in my life. Um, I can't walk into my own garage. I have a closet full of clothes that I never wear. These kinds of things. That's how people tend to come to me. They reach a point where things don't feel right and they don't feel right spiritually. They feel off, they feel out of alignment somehow. So
Hmm.
I hope that answers your question kind of in a roundabout way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm sort of thinking like maybe the next question that audience members might have is like, well, how do we move from ego to soul? Like, what's the process that you walk through people with?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question of life, right? Because we're all saddled with these aspects and we're moving in and out of these aspects all the time. So the work I try to do when I go to someone's home is I the first question I ask them is, what is your soul longing for right now? And most
Mm,
people, if you sit quietly for a few minutes or a few seconds, something will well up inside from your deeper knowing, your deeper intuitive place. So people might say, I want more ease in my life. I want more spaciousness. I want to feel more free. I want to do my art again. I want to have a family, right? Um, any number of things that there is their current soul's longing. Now, once you have a sense of that, then you can begin to look around your house and say, does this item contribute to what my soul is longing for right now?
wow. I'm just soaking that in. That's
Yeah,
so
it's a lot.
beautiful.
It's deep.
Yeah.
Decluttering is deep. It's not about putting a bunch of stuff in fancy containers and organizing it. I mean, there's a place for that, but it's much deeper. It's about people. I say, well, are you a minimalist? I said, no, it's not about minimalism. It's about honesty. It's about
Mm,
it's about are you really living the truth that you are a soul here temporarily with one focus, which is to serve your love to the world in whatever ways you do. You're doing it through this podcast. People do it through their corporate work, or being an artist, or being a mother, father, whatever ways we do it. And there's multiple ways typically. But when we know that, then we have to be more honest about our environments inside and out, and if they're contributing to that.
Beautiful. Wow. So you start the process by asking this question and then moving through all the different types of clutter, mental clutter, emotional clutter, relationship clutter, and physical, which we briefly spoke about. How do you walk through that process with folks? Like, what are some of the questions you might ask? And how long does the process usually take?
Yeah, well, so this is a very interesting question here about how long it usually takes. And I think most people they like those shows, on TV, the hoarder shows, right? Where the people come in and they put everything in a truck and a bunch of garbage bins, and then they walk away. But I don't, and that's true. That happens. But to me, this is a lifelong process, decluttering. And I don't mean that like there's no end in sight. You must continue on. It's to me, it's fun. It's a release party. That's what I call it when I declutter. It's like in any moment in time, you're releasing what doesn't serve in that moment of time, and that can change over time. And then bigger than that, of course, is we're all souls and human bodies, and we all have an ego mind, right? So we're constantly trying to determine who's at the wheel. Is this thought from my true soul nature, or is this an ego thought, ego emotion, ego way of relating, right? So that's kind of the ongoing search of us as human beings here on this planet. Um,
Mm,
but as far as decluttering, to me, it's when you can identify what your soul is longing for and get clear about what you want in this next moment of your life, this next year, this next phase, this next few months, whatever it is. That gives you a lens to then look at everything through that lens. And when you do that, things begin to let go of you. It's the opposite of what people think, right? You have to force yourself to get rid of things. You have to judge yourself for having them. You have to be ashamed because you have so much and other people have nothing. All these kind of ego-based cultural messages. Um, I don't see it that way. I see it as a release party, because my freedom is tied to your freedom. And the more free you can be, the more free I can be, because we're all connected.
mm, beautiful. Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking about that as I moved from the Bay Area to LA, and there's definitely just kind of a general different orientation towards I'd say the accumulation of
Yes.
things in each city. So how have some of the people you've worked with changed their lives through this process?
Well, people have amazing things happen when they begin to clear out clutter, whether it's clutter in their thoughts or their feelings or their relationships or their drawers, their bathrooms, cabinets, because everything we hold on to is like stagnant energy. It's untapped energy. So when you begin to move things, to let go, to make decisions about, um, you necessarily kind of create a different flow of energy, and with that comes changes. So people may decide to change their jobs. They may get a new job. I mean, I've had people get in touch with long lost relatives who will call like 2 days after they've just decluttered a room and talked about that person because they found something connected to them, and they're stuffed in the guest room box, right? Um, so all kinds of magic happens when we declutter, and people tend to mostly just feel more like themselves, less trapped, less overwhelmed, more able to make choices to do what feeds their soul rather than what feeds what the culture says is important, right? Which is all ego based culture, right? You have to accumulate, you have to achieve, you have to be the best, you have to compete, you have to stand out, all these things. And, you're in LA right now, so I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. I think a lot of us are driven by ego. And I think, I loved in the book, you spoke about how you became, I wouldn't call it minimalist, right? But I sort of feel like you went through this process of only keeping what is necessary. And I think back to an earlier conversation with a previous guest who talked about syntropy and entropy. And he spoke about how the more simplified your life is, the more synchronicities that are possible.
Absolutely. There's no static, there's no clogging. It's like you can think of clutter as like clogging your bloodstream, right? Or clogging the energy acupuncture systems, right? The energy meridians. It's like the house is the metaphor for the self. So clutter is static. Clutter inhibits free flow. So yes, I
Mm.
agree with that for sure.
So, after you ask these two questions, what sort of order do you work through when it comes to some of the other clutter? We spoke about a little bit about mental clutter and emotional clutter. Can you maybe define what those mean to folks? Because I think most decluttering books really just talk about one type of clutter, or maybe two at most.
Mhm.
But I love how you brought in all these different types of clutter, which to me contribute to the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think all these things kind of happen at once. It's not really a linear process when I sit with someone. So let's say I go into someone's home and we begin. What is your soul longing for right now? I want to feel more spaciousness and freedom. Okay, great. So let's look around and you tell me internally, where does your intuition take you? Where do you want to start? Right? Someone might say, well, first they'll say, I don't know, I'm not sure. And I say, well, let's just be with it for a minute. And then they'll say, I want to start in the guest room, or I want to start in my closet, or I want to empty the garage, or whatever it is. So I always trust people's intuition where they want to start. And I think that um, a lot of times, because everything's connected, um, I've been in situations where I've been sitting in a bathroom with somebody, clearing out the cabinets of the outdated medication and the beauty products they don't use anymore, and the raggedy old towels, and all the things that are not worthy of their soul, right? um,
Hmm.
and and they might start crying on the floor because some
Mm.
emotion is being unlocked, right, about anything. I mean, you just never know. That's the magic and the mystery of it. um, because our clutter is all connected. And if you don't know yourself as a worthy soul, then chances are you try um, to create a sense of worth. So maybe you go and buy a bunch of stuff you don't need. Maybe you're in relationships that um, are ego based, that are harmful to you. Maybe you don't take care of your own physical relationship to yourself, right? Self care, trust in your intuition, all these kinds of things. So these are kind of examples of how things are all connected. So wherever you start, whether you start with your thoughts that might be cluttery, right? Maybe you spend a lot of time thinking about the past, jumping ahead to the future, right? That's what the ego mind does. Maybe you resist a lot, right? Whatever's happening, you're resisting it all the time. It's sunny out. I wish it was raining. I'm sick. I wish I wasn't sick. I'm tired. I shouldn't be tired. I should keep moving. Right? Like all these kinds of things are going on in the mind all the time. So wherever we start, we find a thread to something else. That's what makes it fun.
Amazing. I want you to come over to my apartment.
Well, that's why
I
I wrote the book, because I can't come to everyone's apartment, and I wish I could, because I love doing the work. I love watching people get free and get more in touch with themselves. It's like it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's intimate, it's very sacred work to me. It really is, and so that's why I wrote the book, because I felt like I had something to say. Right, I had this experience, and I wanted to write the book in a way that people could read it and feel like they have company to go through the process. And it's hard to break it all down in a 45-minute podcast. There's a lot of content in the book, and a lot of practical stuff, as well as more kind of esoteric or spiritual kind of perspective. But I try to do my best to get it all in there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I was inspired after reading your book too. I think my biggest, I guess, piece of clutter is my books. I'm not exaggerating, maybe 1,000 books,
Hmm.
and I have brought them with me everywhere and refer back to them. But I went through and actually released a lot of books from my bookcase after reading that because yeah, it's interesting when you investigate the attachment you have to certain objects and things and what it means to you. Like, what does it represent?
Yeah. What did you find with the books? I mean, I'm just curious.
So I had a period in my life where I was really interested in things like politics and finance and, you know, yeah, that kind of stuff. And then I moved more into like leadership and, now for the last several years I've been really interested in books like in the intuitive world, in self-development, personal mastery, that kind of stuff. And so I realized that this each phase of my life should actually take precedence on my bookshelf as opposed to kind of bringing them all together, right? So I let go of a lot of my finance books from back in the day, and I think it just represented a period in my life where I felt savvy in a particular subject, which I don't feel as confident anymore, right? So yeah, so it was interesting to see also which books I was letting go of.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
the whole process of decluttering, and what you're speaking of with the books, it's like you're bringing yourself into present time. And although you've had these experiences in the past with interest in politics or any finance or anything like that, that's great and fine and part of your life story. But in present time, that's not what gives you juice anymore. It's not where your soul is heading in terms of where it wants to keep your focus. And that's fine. It's like, okay, let me bring myself into present time by releasing things that aren't in present time. Um, and that's one of the things I always ask clients in the home, is this item, is this possession in present time? Now that doesn't mean you have to get rid of every bit of memorabilia you ever had. I'm not suggesting you erase your life. Right? I mean, that's not the point, but there are certain things, like if you've got a whole bunch of skiing equipment out in the garage, but you don't ski anymore, because you physically can't, let's say you've had an injury or something, well, then that ski equipment is not in present time and could actually serve somebody else. Um, so if you liberate it, someone else gets to have joy from it. Same with your books. Someone else's soul is longing to know more about politics and finance. So,
Right.
that's great. Give them what they need.
Right, right. Yes. Okay. I love I love that. I love that. Yeah, and I'm so inspired to go do this work. It's so hard. I think that's the part about decluttering that I think is so hard is starting, right? Is just like having the catalyst to actually do it. Like I think most people want more organization, more spaciousness, but then I'd say maybe 90% plus, we just don't do it. So,
Absolutely. We're overwhelmed to start with. It's a big job. It feels insurmountable. And there's a million other things we'd rather be doing, right? It's like,
right.
but what I, and I just believe this, and more than I believe it, I know it from my experience. It's just, there's nothing really more fun and more important than clearing things that are getting in the way of what we're here to do in the world, and sharing them with other people who may be less fortunate and have less than us. It's like keeping the flow of receiving and giving going, instead of accumulating and hoarding. We're all
Mm.
hoarders. I mean, you see these shows, those are extreme versions, but you can look at any house in any town, in any city, in any state, and it's filled with people that have bought into a cultural thing that we're supposed to, and an ego mind thing that says, I have to have, I have to have it. I have to feel safe and secure through my possessions. Um, I can't let
Mm.
go. Um, and getting started, like you said, the biggest thing I always say is just start somewhere, start anywhere, clean out a drawer, one drawer, you know, go find 25 things around the house. When you're done listening to the podcast, go find 25 things you can release. Anything counts, a piece of paper, an old stuffed animal, your habit of saying I'm sorry every 15 minutes, anything you can think of. Um, some of the noise in your life, turn off the TV for 20 minutes, go for a hike without your headphones on, um, that kind of thing, right? It's all forms of clutter that keep us away from what we're here for, and our kind of our true deeper intuitive nature.
Hmm. Yes, I love that. And what was your process like, Peggy, when you were going through this? I imagine that there was some moment that catalyzed it for you to start decluttering and live, a more soul-driven life.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because when I was with my ex-husband, Ralph, he was a very decluttered sort of guy, and I didn't have a lot of physical clutter at the time, but definitely, he had a lot less, and so he was kind of a catalyst for that, and also for all kinds of clutter, because as you know, as you go through a relationship, that's when all the mental and emotional and,
Yeah.
and clutter comes out. But one of my jobs, at one point, I worked as a wilderness therapist. So I would take troubled kids out on 21-day backpacking expeditions with a team of people. And in that process, you're out there for 21 days in remote areas, and you have a backpack and you have one spoon and you've got whatever clothes you brought and whatever gear you need. But that's what you've got. And having that experience kind of showed me a little bit more about what's essential, right? Um, and I think my entire life has been a search for what's essential in terms of people and connection, and who we really are and who I really am and who you really are, and where can we meet that's true, right? So that's always been a thing for me. I've worked in counseling and healing and addiction work and energy work and on and on and on. That's just been my orientation to life. So I think that backpacking experience, and then just my own decision early to live for experiences rather than for kind of the prescribed cultural, get a job, stay in it for 30 years, and, get your retirement fund and all that. I just never lived that kind of life. Um, I certainly started out on that track, but getting a Ph.D. and doing all the culturally prescribed things. But then I just thought, no, I want experiences. So if you're going for experiences, you need to, you naturally let go, right? Because you're moving from one thing to the next.
Amen. That's been my life journey as well. I'm living and traveling to a lot of places, and also left the corporate, I guess, maybe linear game.
Hmm.
I've heard it described as like an assembly line life,
Yeah.
as well. But yeah, that's beautiful. And how has the pandemic shifted your work, or has it shifted your work?
Well, I think the pandemic has shifted everybody. And for anybody who's out there doing the work of decluttering, or the work of spiritual writings, or, other ways of living, all these sorts of topics have come into focus now, because I think in that time, although there were tremendous horrors going on for people, people dying and dealing with family stress, of all of that was horrible. And yet there was this kind of slice of light happening as well, because we were everybody slowed down, you know. Everybody didn't have to follow the pace and rhythm that they were used to. People were spending time with their family more. They were spending time outside more. They were less distracted with all the demands of life, right? Just getting to the office every day and what that took. Um, and people, I think, were less consuming, right? We weren't out as much in the stores buying and at restaurants buying and consuming and all these things. And I just think it collectively brought us to another layer of like, hey, wait a minute, what really matters? What really matters for me in my life? And as you can see, there's been a lot of transition from that. You know, people are the great resignation, right? People are leaving jobs and people are deciding to go live outside of city centers in more sane circumstances, whether in suburbs or less populated areas or buying land. You know, all these sorts of things are about people being called to listen more deeply to what truly matters in their own souls, knowing for their life path. And that was one of the gifts of COVID in my experience.
Mm, yeah, beautiful. Uh, why do you think this subject is important, Peggy?
Um, I think this subject is important because it's really the only game in town. I mean, and I don't say that like in an obnoxious way, but I really mean that we are here temporarily. We are here with love and to serve our love and to make the world a better place and to engage our passions and to bring aliveness to those we meet and kindness. I mean, that's our true state, right? Our soul nature is about presence. It's about peace. It's about contentment and acceptance. It's about connection, collaborating, letting go, right? That's our soul nature. But everything else is the ego at the wheel, right? Or when our culture oriented towards fear and feeling less than and striving and competing and accumulating, it's not our true state. So the work is important because we're here to clear the clutter of who we are not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's actually getting harder for a lot of people because of social media and just all these comparisons being made. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's been fascinating just to like kind of see people move through this time. And um, Peggy, I'm also curious, like, what was your journey like? Can you tell us about how did you discover that love is the only game in town? And were you always did you always have this mindset?
I guess I think we all have this mindset deep down. And I think we're all trying to learn all the time and be better and be, kinder and more authentic and more natural. I think for me, I'm not really sure. I don't really have an answer to that because it kind of trips you into that weird ego category. Like, well, I'm so whatever. I'm just like everybody else. I have all forms of clutter, mental, emotional. But I'm a little more aware of it, and I'm trying to be more and more mindful. And that's been kind of the work I've done with people as a counselor, as a therapist, as a coach. In the different capacities I've worked in. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I know that what comes to mind when you ask that is when I was 36, I found out I was in premature menopause and I couldn't have children. And to be honest, at the time I was married and we didn't really want to have children, but we thought, well, maybe, right? Maybe when we're 40, we'll go ahead and do it, kind of thing. But then all of a sudden that decision was kind of quote taken away, right? And I think at the time I was working in the wilderness, and I remember going out on a trip, and I said kind of to nature and to the universe, I guess, I just said, how am I supposed to give birth in the world? Um,
Hmm.
and the answer that came back very clearly was give birth to yourself first. And that kind of set me on a whole trajectory. That's when I ended up getting divorced, though it certainly wasn't causal, but in that time a lot changed, and I began a deeper dive because into myself, because not being able to have a kid and the whole world being about having children, and then my own thing of failing as a woman or whatever that is, right? All those things came up, right? All the mental and emotional clutter of that was coming up to be investigated. So I was sifting through a lot of that clutter at the time. um, and then I decided to go live and work at the Omega Institute, which kind of, again, opened portals to all kinds of other things that happened in my life. So it's just all
Amazing.
moments, right? They all lead. It's like following breadcrumbs. That's what I tell people. We're just following the breadcrumbs, And to me, I think we're better off following soul breadcrumbs rather than ego breadcrumbs.
Mm. Yes, amen. And Peggy, what has like surprised you the most on this journey?
What surprised me the most is that anytime I go anywhere, whether it's a party or, hanging out with people, whatever it is, and if I say I do this sort of work, or now I'll say, oh, I wrote this book, right? Every single person says, oh my God, I need that. Everybody feels that way. Everybody. And and that to me is quite stunning and quite exciting because people know that they're not really living maybe the way they want to live. And I don't mean drastic sweeping changes, but even little things. Can you walk into your bedroom and it be clean and neat without clothes that you worked really hard for strewn all over? Can you respect, all the things you've chosen in your life, right? Everything in your house, as an example. These are things you've chosen. Of all the cajillions of things in this universe, you've chosen these particular things, right? So they're sacred just by nature of the fact that you chose them from all the myriad of choices. So it's like, how are you representing that? How are you treating them sacredly? How are you making your environment worthy of who you are as a soul, as a being, a human being, right? These are important things. And the other thing I've been surprised with is many, many people have been in their homes and they have not made the connection that if if they have 10 pillows on their bed, somebody else out there doesn't have a pillow. And if you can release just one of those pillows, I'm using pillows as an example, but if you can release one of those, somebody else has what they need. Somebody else isn't forgotten. I always say sharing is the new philanthropy, right?
I
Let's
love that.
share what we have. It's not that deep. It's super deep, but
Mm.
it's not that complicated, right? It's like, wow. People don't make the connection that there are people with very little
Yeah.
and
Wow.
there's people with too much, but they're all, from the same source.
So, Peggy, what do you want to tell our listeners about their wellness and well being? What's your main takeaway? If you could tell folks anything as we wrap up, what would that be?
I think the biggest key to health and wellness is to remember who we are. We are souls in physical bodies temporarily inhabiting this earth. And I think when we can start there, we necessarily begin to live differently. We begin to live more awake. We begin to live more considerately of other people. We begin to take care of our physical vessels that house us for this time. Um, we begin to focus on what matters more than what someone else tells us that matters, that may not matter to us. So it starts a whole kind of uh, opening of coming back to who we are. And that is what health and wellness is. Health and wellness is accepting who we are and and living more freely and calmly and in our own rhythm and in our own desires. you know that is what health and wellness is. And most people who don't feel they're living that life, their life is out of tune, they're out of alignment, they're living at the wrong pace for themselves, they're in a pressure job when they don't really like pressure, they're an accountant when they want to be a painter. They're worried about money constantly, they're trying to save and prepare for a future that may never come. They're holding on to things, thinking that it's forever, and it's not.
Yep. Amen. Yeah. I think we get all very caught up in our own kind of personal story and trajectory. And, I think a lot of people could afford the life that they want without pushing themselves. They just need to declutter.
Yeah. I always
Right?
say if it costs you peace, it's too expensive.
Yeah.
And I think most people who are listening, if they're listening to this in the first place, then they're interested in this area of decluttering. And there's tons of books, tons of websites. I mean, there's so much information. So if you're feeling the pull, follow the impulse. Just follow it, one small step. It doesn't have to be a complete transformation of your life in one day. That's not how it works. Just start somewhere, make a step.
Beautiful. So, Peggy, are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, I have a website. There's a few articles and podcasts and things like that. So anyone who, is not in a financial position to purchase a book or doesn't want the clutter of a book, I totally get that. So there's some things on my website, which is peggyfitzsimmons.com. And, like I said, there's all kinds of people tapping into this desire to kind of release the things that don't really serve us. So find the author that resonates with you, find the podcast that resonates with you, but trust yourself that if you're feeling something wants to shift, that is very doable, and you can get help with a book or with professionals that are out there doing the work with people, coming into people's homes. Get help. We all need company for all aspects of our lives. So there's no shame in needing help at all. It's actually a joyful thing to be helped and to help someone in this kind of work.
Amazing, amazing. And we'll leave the link to your website and book in the show notes. So thank you so much for your time, Peggy. This was so inspiring, and I'm excited to look at my own apartment and go through the list as well.
Great. That's great. Thanks so much for having me, and best to you and what you're doing to bring light and love to the world through this podcast. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Peggy. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about decluttering with Peggy Fitzsimmons, and you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.